Hey friends, there's a kind of weight that can show up in conversations, especially the ones that matter the most. Not just in what you're trying to say, but in everything that might happen after you say it. You think about how it will be received, how it might be interpreted, whether it will land with the way or in the way that you intended or create something you didn't mean to create. And sometimes that weight is subtle. It doesn't always feel like fear. It can feel like responsibility, like you're trying to do the right thing, to say it well, to make sure nothing gets lost or misunderstood along the way. But underneath that, there can be a quiet pressure to manage something that was never fully yours to carry. Because at some point, many of us learned, whether through experience or expectation, that how something is received matters just as much as what was said. So we try to account for everything. We choose our words carefully. We think ahead to possible reactions. We adjust, soften, explain, or even just hold back entirely. Not because we don't have something to say, but because we're trying to make sure that it lands well. And over time, that can begin to feel like a part of being faithful. Like if we say it the right way, the outcome will follow. Like if it doesn't land well, we must have missed something. But what if that's not actually the weight that we're meant to carry? What if faithfulness was never about controlling the outcome in the first place? Before we move any further, I want to take you into a place in Scripture that speaks directly into this tension, not by removing it, by gently reframing what we've been carrying. This comes from Colossians 4:6, and it's a short instruction about the way that we speak. It says, "Let your speech always be gracious and seasoned with salt." If you slow down and really sit with that, it's striking how simple that instruction is. It doesn't ask you to anticipate every possible reaction or shape your words in a way that guarantees they will be received well. It simply calls you to speak with grace and to let what comes out of your mouth reflect something steady, something thoughtful, and something rooted in who you are becoming. And then the verse continues, so that you may know how you should answer each person. There's a clarity in that's easy to miss if we're used to carrying more than that. The focus stays on how we speak, not on how the other person responds. And it doesn't extend the responsibility beyond your words into their reaction. It quietly stops where your responsibility ends. There's another place that holds this same tension, and this time it's in Ephesians 4:15, where we're told to speak the truth in love. That's something many of us have heard before, but it can carry the more weight than it was ever meant to if we're not careful. Because it can start to feel like there's a perfect balance we need to achieve before we say anything at all. As if we need to be completely sure that we found the exact right tone, the exact right words, and the exact right timing so that everything lands the way that it should. But the passage itself doesn't place that kind of pressure on the outcome. It simply names the posture, truth held with love. And then it leaves a space for the reality that what happens next is not something that we can fully control. Because even when something is said with care, it can still be misunderstood. Even when you've taken the time to think through your words, that doesn't guarantee they will be received in the way that you hoped. And Scripture doesn't try to resolve that tension for you. It just keeps bringing you back to what belongs to you. The same idea shows up again in Proverbs 16:1, which says, "The reflections of the heart belong to mankind, but the answer of the tongue is from the Lord." There's a part of this that is yours to carry. Your intention, your posture, the care you bring into what you say, those things matter. But the outcome, the response, the way that it's ultimately received, that's not something you were meant to hold on your own. And when you begin to see these passages together, they don't create pressure to get everything exactly right. They begin to separate from what's yours from what isn't. And they bring you back to faithfulness and gently release you from control. There's a subtle shift that can happen over time when it comes to the way we communicate with people, especially in conversations that carry meaning or emotion. It doesn't usually start with a clear decision. Most people don't consciously choose to take on the responsibility for how they're received. It develops gradually, shaped by moments that don't always feel significant on their own, but leave an impression that stays longer than expected. It might be a conversation where something you said didn't land in the way that you intended. And you could feel that shift happen almost immediately. A moment where you tried to explain yourself, but the other person heard something different than what you meant. Or a situation where what you said created tension that you didn't know how to resolve, and you walked away wishing you could go back and adjust it. Sometimes it's more subtle than that. It can be the feeling of being misunderstood even when you're trying to be clear, or realizing that what made sense in your mind didn't come out the same way when you said it out loud. It can be noticing how quickly a conversation changes tone after something is said, even if you're not entirely sure why. And over time, these moments begin to add up, not in a way that feels dramatic, but in a way that slowly shapes how you approach the next conversation. You start paying closer attention. You think a little longer before you respond, and you begin to anticipate how something might be received before you even say it, trying to adjust your words so they land more clearly, more gently, or maybe more safely. At first, that kind of awareness can feel like growth. It can feel like you're becoming more thoughtful, more intentional, more aware of the impact that your words have on others. And in many ways, that is true. But somewhere along the way, it can begin to shift from awareness into responsibility. Not just for what you say, but for how it's received. And that's where things start to feel heavier, because instead of simply being present in the conversation, you find yourself trying to manage it before it even happens. You consider how the other person might react. You think about how to prevent misunderstanding. You try to shape your words in a way that will guide the outcome to a certain direction. And sometimes without realizing it, that leads to holding something else back. Not because you don't have something else to say, but because you're not sure how it will be received. So you soften it. You explain it a little more than necessary, or you wait, hoping the moment will feel clearer later. And occasionally you decide that it might be better not to say it at all. Not out of avoidance, but out of an extra caution and out of extra care. Because you don't want to create something that you'll have to carry for afterward. And the more meaningful the relationship is, the more weight that can hold. Because now it's not just something being understood, it's about protecting something that matters to you. It's about trying to keep the conversation steady to avoid unnecessary tension, to make sure that what you say doesn't disrupt something that you value. So you take that on, carefully, quietly, consistently, and over time, it can begin to feel like that's just part of being faithful in how you communicate. Like if you say it the right way, things will stay steady. And if they don't, then you must have missed something. As that pattern settles over time, it doesn't just shape how you approach conversations, it begins to shape how you experience them entirely. Because even when nothing outwardly goes wrong, there can still be a quiet awareness running underneath the surface. A sense that you're paying attention not just to what is being said, but how it's landing in real time. You might notice subtle shifts in tone, a small change in expression, or moments where the conversation feels slightly off, even if you can't fully explain why. And in those moments, it can feel like something is required of you. Not always something obvious, but something internal, a need to adjust, to clarify, to smooth over what might have been misunderstood before it grows into something bigger. And you may find yourself revisiting what you just said, mentally retracing the words while the conversation is still happening, trying to decide if something needs to be corrected or explained more clearly. That kind of awareness can make it difficult to stay fully present. It's like you have multiple tabs open on your browser all happening at the same time. Because part of your mind is engaged in the conversation while the other part of you, that other tab, is quietly evaluating it all at the same time. And you're not just speaking, you're also monitoring how your words are being received, trying to keep everything aligned as it unfolds. And when the conversation ends, that awareness doesn't always stop. It can follow you into the quiet moments afterward when you're replaying what was said and how it might have been interpreted. You might revisit certain phrases, wondering if they came across differently than you intended them to, or if there was something you could have said in a more clear or helpful way. Sometimes that reflection is gentle and brief, but other times it can carry a little more weight because it's not just about the words, it's about the outcome, whether the conversation moved things forward or created tension, whether the other person understood what you meant or walked away with something different, whether something now needs to be revisited, repaired, or explained again. And when you feel responsible for those outcomes, even in subtle ways, it can be hard to let the moment rest. It can begin to feel like every conversation has a kind of emotional follow-through that you need to manage even after it's over. So you carry it with you. You think about it while you're doing other things. You revisit it when your mind has a quiet moment. You consider whether you should circle back, clarify something, or try again in a different way. Not because you're overthinking, but because you care. Because relationships matter to you. Because communication matters to you. But you want what you said to be received in a way that reflects what you actually meant. And that desire itself is not the problem. But when it quietly becomes your responsibility to ensure how everything is received, it can create a weight that lingers longer than the conversations itself. And over time, that can make even the simplest conversations feel heavier than they were meant to be. When you begin to see this pattern more clearly, something important starts to come into view, not all at once, but gradually. You start to notice that there are actually two different things happening in these moments, even though they felt like one for a long time. There's what belongs to you, and there is what doesn't. And for many people, those two things have slowly blended together over time. Because it makes sense in a way. When you care about people, when you value relationships, when you want your words to reflect what you truly mean, it's natural to pay attention to how those words are received. It's natural to want to communicate clearly and thoughtfully and to take responsibility for your part in that. That part is not something you need to step away from, but what often gets added to it, almost without being noticed, is something heavier. A quiet assumption that if something is misunderstood, it must be because you didn't say it the right way. That if a conversation creates tension, you must have missed something. If that outcome isn't what you had hoped for, then there was something more you should have done before you spoke. And over time, that assumption can begin to shape the way you carry yourself in conversations. It can make you feel like you need to anticipate everything in advance, like you need to manage not just your words, but the entire experience of the conversation. Like somehow your responsibility is to ensure that everything stays steady from beginning to end. But when you hold that next to what we saw in Scripture, something begins to separate. You are responsible for how you speak, but you are not responsible for how it is received. And those two things do not carry the same weight. Because the first invites you into faithfulness, into speaking with care, with honesty, and with love, and with intention. It allows you to show up fully present without needing to be perfect. And the second invites you into control, into trying to manage something that involves the other person's thoughts, experiences, emotions, and interpretations, things that have never been fully within your reach. And when those two things are blended together, communication becomes heavier than it was ever meant to be. And when they begin to separate, even slightly, something shifts. Not necessarily in how the conversation unfolds, but in how you carry yourself within it. Because you no longer have to hold both sides at once. You can be faithful with what belongs to you while slowly releasing what never did. And that doesn't mean that every conversation will go smoothly. And it doesn't mean that you still won't care about how something is received. It doesn't mean you won't feel the weight of certain moments more than others. But it does mean that the outcome is no longer resting entirely on you. It creates a little more space to speak without needing to control, space to care without needing to carry everything, and space to trust that God is present not just in your words, but in what happens after them. And that kind of space doesn't remove the importance of what you say. It simply reminds you that you were never meant to carry it alone. And as that begins to settle in, even just a little, it doesn't necessarily change the way every conversation unfolds. You may still find yourself pausing before you speak. You may still think carefully about your words, especially in moments that feel important or sensitive. You may still care deeply about how something is received because care is part of what makes your relationships meaningful. But what it can begin to change is the way that you carry those moments. Instead of stepping into a conversation feeling like you need to manage everything from beginning to end, there can be a quieter awareness that you're only responsible for your part in it, that you can show up honestly, speak with care, and trust that what happens next is not something that you have to control. That doesn't mean you stop being thoughtful, and it doesn't mean you stop paying attention. It also doesn't mean you suddenly feel completely free of hesitation, but it does begin to shift the pressure because you're no longer trying to hold both sides of the conversation at once. You're no longer trying to ensure that everything lands perfectly or that the response is exactly the way you hoped it would be. You are simply showing up, being faithful with what belongs to you, and allowing the rest to unfold without needing to carry it at all. And that kind of shift is often quiet. It doesn't always feel like a breakthrough moment. It can feel like a small release, a loosening of something that you've been holding for a long time without realizing how tightly you were carrying it. A little less tension in your thoughts, a little more space in the moment, a little less urgency to fix or adjust everything as it happens, and over time that space can begin to change the way you experience conversations altogether. Not because everything becomes easier, but because you are no longer carrying it alone. As you sit with all of this, there isn't really anything you need to figure out right now. This isn't a moment where you plan your next conversation or decide how you'll say things differently moving forward. There's nothing here that needs to be solved before you step into whatever comes next. But there is an invitation for you to notice, to gently pay attention to where this shows up in your own life, not with pressure, not with the need to change it immediately, but with the quiet awareness that simply allows you to see what you've been carrying. Maybe it's a recent conversation where you felt the need to explain yourself more than you wanted to. Maybe it's in the way you replay certain moments afterwards, trying to decide if something could have been said differently. Or maybe it's in the hesitation you feel before speaking, when you're not entirely sure how something will be received. Not to fix it, just to recognize it and realize that even there, you are not alone. So as you sit with that, here's a simple question for you to hold for a moment. Where in your life do you find yourself trying to manage how your words are received instead of simply being faithful in how you speak? Again, where in your life do you find yourself trying to manage how your words are received instead of simply being faithful in how you speak? As we move into prayer, just take a moment to let that question settle. There's nothing you need to do with it right now. Just allow it to be present as you bring it before God. God, you see us more clearly than we see ourselves. You see the way we step into conversations, the care that we carry, the quiet weight we sometimes hold as we try to make sure everything lands the way that it should. You see the moments where we hesitate, the times where we replay what we said, the places where we feel responsible for more than we actually can control. And you have never asked us to carry all of that. Thank you for the clarity of your word, for reminding us that we are called to be faithful in how we speak, not responsible for how everything is received. Thank you that you see the difference when we struggle to separate it ourselves. Would you help us begin to release what does not belong to us? not all at once, and not in a way that feels forced, but gently over time. Help us to recognize where we've taken on more than you ever asked us to carry, and to trust that you are present, not just in what we say, but in what happens afterward. Teach us that what it looks like to speak with grace, to hold the truth with love, and to do so without needing to control the outcome. In these moments where we still feel that pull to manage everything, would you meet us there with patience and steadiness, and remind us that we are not alone in any of it. Amen. As you move into the rest of your week, there's something I want you to carry with you, not as pressure, but as permission. May you begin to experience the freedom of being faithful in how you speak without needing to carry the weight of how everything is received. May you find yourself less burdened by the need to manage every outcome and more grounded in the steady presence of God with you in every conversation. May you come to realize that being misunderstood does not mean you have failed, and that your responsibility was never to control the response, only to show up with honesty, care, and love. And as you move forward, may you feel a quiet confidence growing, not in your ability to get everything exactly right, but in the truth that you are not carrying it all alone. Thank you for spending this time with me today. If this space has been meaningful for you, I want you to know that there's a place you can continue this journey in a way that fits you. Everything we're building, these devotionals, the companion guides, the Quiet Authority devotional, it's all connected now through a website. You can find it at Healer and Hope Giver, www.healerhopegiver, all together, healerhopegiver.com. It's designed to be a guided experience to help the Healer and Hope Giver help you experience the Healer and Hope Giver ecosystem, where you can choose your own path depending on what you need in this season, whether you want to go deeper into a specific episode or sit with something more slowly, or just have a place to return to during the week. It's all there in one place and easy for you to move through at your own pace. And if this episode resonated with you, one of the simplest ways that you can help someone else find this space is by sharing it. You never know who might need to hear something like this right when they're walking through a similar moment. You can also follow the podcast wherever you're listening, so these Thursday devotionals and Monday longer episodes show up for you each week. And if you prefer YouTube, you can find everything there as well. And if something in this episode stayed with you, I would love to hear about that. You can always message me through social media or through any of the apps that I am on, or, on the website. There's a place where you can email me as well. I do read every single message, and I honestly love hearing what's resonating or what you're still working through. It often helps me to know what needs to be revisited or explored more deeply in future episodes. We'll continue this conversation on Monday with our next long-form episode, and then meet back here again on Thursday. Until next time, just remember, you are not responsible for carrying what was never yours to hold.